Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular podcast, I'm going to talk about drama people. These are not actors, these are real persons. And if you happen to have these kinds of people in your life, well, you might want to reassess why you have them. And so I'm going to give you a true story here. I'm not going to name names per se, because I'm just going to describe male, female, because I don't want to embarrass anyone. And in particular, here's a scenario. I have a friend. She has been dating a particular guy for let's say about a couple of years. And she found out some things about him and even with the knowledge of this gentleman's past, she decided, okay, so let me give you something about his past. He had dated many women, but she was okay with that. She said to me she was perfectly okay with that as long as he didn't fall in love with these other women. Well, basically that, she was treating it like it was an open relationship, at least for him. And I'd asked her about, well, what's her status? Not because I was personally interested, but I was just trying to understand the dynamic. And she didn't care to date anyone else. Well, you see, now this is her relationship and she can decide to have it however she wants it. So she decides that this particular gentleman that she wants in her life is someone that she's going to be committed to, regardless of how he's behaving. And it sounds like she knew enough about this guy that he was polyamorous. And polyamorous means it's a person who has love and feelings for several people, much like what an open relationship can be. And that was on his part, but not her part. So just want to make sure that my listening audience, I've established that. Well, when the conversation got to, has she introduced him to any of her friends or anything like that? Because when I first had spoken to her about this individual, I started to ask some questions. I mean, being a guy, I tend to know how guys think, and the good and the not so good. And I was wondering if she was going into this relationship with eyes wide open, because my very first communication with her about this individual, it was very shortly after she had met him, and she was describing herself as being his fiance. And I just thought that was awful abrupt, being, I hadn't talked to her in 2 or 3 months at that point. And then this new guy shows up, and all of a sudden they're talking something that sounds like it's fairly permanent. Well, I just wondered how much she knew about the guy. And as she was describing more and more things, it just sounded like, okay, this is a not a situation that's very well balanced. And I'm going to get to the drama part. So I've set this up just so that you get, I think any of you listening to this situation understands where this thing is going to go. But you have to wonder when the players that are in it can't imagine where this situation is going. Now, was she with him for the sex? Was she with him because he's exciting? You know, I asked her specifically those questions, and the response that I got was something somewhere between how a teenager would respond or somebody that just didn't care, like it went in one ear and out the other. Now, mind you, she's a grown woman. She can decide what she wants for herself. But now, the reason I am in this conversation is because she had a certain something had happened, and she just needed to vent. And I'm one of these people who have a listening ear for pretty much anything. And I don't judge. But I did take the opportunity when we were in this part of the conversation where she's venting about the problems she's having and ask her to really rethink the kind of relationship she's in. Because I explained to her, you did not pick a guy who was stable, who was gainfully employed, who even in the beginning was willing to do things for you the way you have said that you wanted. Because I had known her when she had dated another gentleman who seemed to be a little more on the giving end, and she really liked that. Well, that relationship didn't work out just for various other reasons. And this new gentleman that she picked, turns out he was exciting. He had a lot of things going on in his life. And as she had described it to me, they didn't sound like they would add up to anyone who could be a real stable person. And by stability, I'm talking about their personal life with their family, their children, and if there's an ex involved, whether that situation is stable. We all have lives. But I think something that we need to consider is when you're interviewing somebody, and I'm going to call it that, who is going to be a potential mate for you, even for a few dates, you kind of want to know something about their past. You want to know something about their problem-solving ability. And it seemed like this guy never solved a problem in life. He just left a mess and went on to the next relationship or something thereof. So when my friend comes into the picture, she basically is someone who he's just taking up with because he left something else. Now, it seems like this guy's had 3 or 4 relationships going on at the same time. And she seemed not to be a stranger to that information, but really had the expectation that he was only going to be emotionally committed to her. Now, that's a fallacy. Do not expect someone who has the life that I've just explained to you in the last few minutes to be emotionally committed to you in any meaningful way. That is unrealistic. Anyone, man or woman, who is listening to this podcast, understand that there are people who are not going to be changed because you show up in their life. They are just going to make you a part of their story, which is exactly what has happened. Now, what transpired after all of this, and now mind you, what I've just shared with you was pretty much the beginning. This relationship lasted at least a couple of years. And by that, this man never owned a home, and she tried to find where this guy lived, and he would never tell her. Now, I'm going to tell you right away, if you're dating somebody and for even an instant, you can't find out something about where they live, that's a red flag. Anybody within the sound of my voice listening to what I'm saying, everyone lives somewhere. Everyone. And if you're going to date that person, spend any meaningful time with that person, you want to know information like that. That should not be anonymous. it has, as it turns out, obviously the guy is not stable. He has some mental issues. She has shared some things with me that I don't need to talk about here on this podcast. But I had to ask her, honestly, what did she expect when she started trying to get down to the nitty-gritty and this guy would not tell her? Well, here's the drama. She obviously has it in her that she likes drama, because when this thing went bad, she should have just let it go. But she couldn't. She hung on because curiosity kills the cat. There's an expression. And she was, I would describe it, she was just morbidly nosy, rather than just having walked away from the relationship and learned something from it, because there's a lot of teachable moments in something like this. She decided to stay engaged and stay involved with this guy. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to take a short break, and then I'm going to come back and talk about why this should not be you. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And in this podcast, I'm talking about drama people. And picking up where I left off, what I want to share with you is I am in no way making fun of this individual. This is an illustration of the kinds of crazy things that go on in our lives. And sometimes when we are in those situations, we don't even see them for what they are. And this, I hope, is a teachable moment for a lot of us. I've been in my crazy moments, and it would take somebody who cared enough about me to stop me and say, hey, John, look at what you're doing. And for this situation, I did the same thing for this person. And I laid it out, not because I was trying to be their counselor, but they had actually come to me for advice. They wanted to know what I thought. And I shared that. And I'm sharing this story. Again, I have not used names because I do not want to embarrass anyone, but I want to give you an opportunity to say, if any of this kind of stuff fits you, this is a crazy making situation. You cannot make sense out of relationships that do these kinds of things. And as human beings, we often find ourselves in situations that we cannot control. And it's sort of like we want to control it because it is crazy, because we want that person, but you can't, that doesn't work. It's never worked. I mean, this is the kind of thing that drives you crazy, that should drive you to a counselor to try to figure out what is it in you that makes you want to be connected to somebody that has this kind of excitement and drama going on. And when I say excitement, I don't mean that in a good way, because there are all kinds of things that came up in this situation for this woman that she did not plan for, but it just seemed as if when it came to what we would consider normal things, normal kinds of relationships, the things where it's, people do, 50-50, that just didn't exist in her world. And when you're in a situation that seems this kind of extreme, you would hope that your senses kick in and say, take a step back. Because one of my favorite expressions, and I use this for myself, is if I stop doing the work, what will happen? Feel free to use that. If you stop doing the work in your relationship, what's going to happen? Is it still going to be there? Because if it's not, then you don't want to be in that relationship because it's not worth your time. It's not worth your time and effort. See, the thing is, when you're young, and I'm going to use a time frame. When you're a teenager, your early 20s, things like that, you're used to transitioning relationships because young kids, and I'm talking children, are used to making friends and taking up new friends really easy. That's just something that kids do. They don't have the experience in life to make a lot of good decisions. But what they do is they experience things on an emotional level. When they like it, then they do it again. When they don't like it, they tend to stay away from it. And that's how it is with kids. That's why they could be fighting one day and then come back the next day and be buddies. Because, I mean, kids have the ability to detach from those ugly feelings. And if you're willing to take up a new beginning, and you can do that over and over, because when you're young, you look at your timeline, you have your whole future ahead of you. But what you tend to learn as you go through life, in your late teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond, is you start looking at those experiences that you've had and say, okay, I don't want to keep starting over with these people. I want to find people who are more like me, who are more normal, who are more consistent. And we tend to be attracted more to that kind of thing. So you see, I'm sort of giving you a time frame, an age-related thing. And in some people, their growth gets stopped for some reason. A lot of times it's a traumatic event that happens to them. And when that traumatic event happens, it's like a boom. Their life becomes stuck. And they keep replaying a series of events to where they can try to break through that cycle. Now, this is what counselors are good at figuring out and helping you work through. Now, psychotherapy, in what it's designed to do, is they do a case history on you, start to figure these things out, because obviously the problem, as you describe it, can give a lot of clues. But then oftentimes, as they do your case history, they can begin to put other things in place, because there's certain things that are going to spark other things. And it could be things that, and again, counselors are trained to look for this. They can pull up things that you never thought of. And that's part of why you want a counselor, because they're objective. But moving this along, as you see your life and the trajectory, and that you're attracted to people that have this sort of drama situation, as you move later on in life, you don't have time to keep starting over. You just don't. And you will find yourself in situations that are crazy making. And you know what? You shouldn't be trying to make sense out of that. Your common sense meter should be ticking off, saying, wait a minute, stop it, don't go any further than this. And just taking a time out and give yourself some love. If you have found yourself constantly in these kinds of relationships, you really have to look in the mirror and says, why are you attracted to this? Because what tends to happen with crazy people like this is they drain you emotionally and financially. And in the particular case of this young lady, or not so young, but she had obviously had this drama, he had taken her away from most of her friends. She had allowed that to happen. Even her family had tried to do an intervention, and that didn't work. After knowing all the things about this guy, she still wanted the guy rather than him. So again, we have to begin to say, okay, something is not working. Because here's the deal. And this is something that I had predicted for her. I says, you're going to have a crisis come up, and this guy is not going to be around for you. Well, in fact, that's exactly what happened. He didn't see fit to stick around and help her. He basically left and went, and he was living his life. And she had to rely on the goodness of other people to make up for his absence. Now, think about that in your particular case. If something like this fits you, you're dealing with a drama situation. Drama people, you don't need them. You need to learn how to be by yourself rather than have somebody like that in your life, sucking up your resources, burning your time, because your life is a timeline. You know where the beginning is because you've been living it, but you don't know when it ends. And I think most people would want to think when they are on their deathbed, they are thinking about how did they live their life? The people they love, do they know that they love them? Do you cherish those moments? Do you take advantage of the opportunity to be around people who care about you? Or are you hanging it all out for that one person you're hoping is going to finally turn around and mirror something back to you that you think you might value. Sometimes they give you just those little crumbs of time. It happens. It's nice when you can get it, but it's not sustaining. It's like food. You got to keep eating. And people like that are going to feed you very little when you really balance it against how relationships can work. I'm going to take a break, and I'll be right back. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and I've been talking about drama people. Now, for up to this point in the podcast, I've been sharing with you an example of someone that I know, someone that I had, it was a friend of mine who I had tried to give some supporting advice, trying to help them work through a situation because they came to me wanting some help. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, so I'm not going to continue with that. I'm going to share a little bit about my own experience, which was many years ago, and it was somebody that I had dated. It was a lady who we had some great chemistry. We went out and did some fun things, but I had asked over time. People reveal themselves to be who they really are. You can ask questions in the beginning, and everybody's on their best behavior. That's just the nature of these things. So let's just let that be a given. But you also have to pay attention. And this particular lady that I was dating she had had a past of which I began to discover some things about. And the past was, shall we say, not so above board. And what I found is that she was very good at conning people. And I was a very gullible guy because I didn't have a whole lot of self-confidence. And I think what I was more concerned with was trying to be in a relationship with someone who would show me some loyalty. So now I thought that was a good trait, but she picked up on that, and gained my confidence, gave me a lot of compliments, and those are good things. But what started to happen is she wanted to borrow things, mostly money. I didn't see that as a bad thing at first because we would go places together. And I would basically pick up the tab, and being the guy in the relationship, I kind of thought that that's what I was supposed to do. But thereafter, let's say we go grocery shopping, and we'd shop together, and she'd say, well, she's going to get hers, and I'm going to get mine. We lived in separate households. We were not cohabitating. Well, she would say, well, look, I'll pay you later. I says, okay, great. Well, later never happened. And I'm just going to fast forward it for you. Later never actually happened because I did not at the time have the courage to say, hey, you know what? Remember when we talked about we were grocery shopping and you said you were going to pay me for that? Well, those kinds of situations were happening fairly regularly. And I think the kicker for me was I finally quit telling her that I was going places. Not going out on dates now, but I'm talking about if I just was going to go to the market, I would go by myself because I started to feel a little uncomfortable about having her along. And I think inside what I was saying to myself is she's ripping me off. I didn't know how to tell her that. I didn't know how to say that because one of the things that drama people are good at is they're good at flipping it. She would have somehow told me, and I'm wanting to be in the relationship, but she would have somehow told me that, I'm crazy for thinking that she was trying to stiff me for the money. Well, you know what? I may have been crazy for thinking it, but crazy probably I should have been dating crazy instead of that, because what my instincts were telling me is there's something not right about the situation. So here's what I finally wound up doing. I had another friend who I had described this scenario, somebody who I could be totally honest with, and it was a lady, and women know women. So here's the thing. If you have women, guys, if you have women friends, I'm saying this to guys, if you have women friends, run the scenario past them. Ask them what they think. Guys, if you have a sister or, older sister or a mom or somebody that's, got some life's experience, they could probably help you figure this thing out and maybe even giving you a good comeback or two just to get this thing, on the right track. I asked a lady friend of mine in describing this scenario, and she said, John, you're getting ripped off. You need to cut her loose. And, I can still remember having that puzzled look on my face when she was saying that to me. Now, I kept trying to make this situation where I kept trying to have it make sense. And if you're one of those people who tries to make these crazy situations make sense, you're out there. You need to dial it back in. Now, I was describing somebody in the earlier part of this podcast who was doing the same thing I was doing. So when she came to me and asked, I was giving it to her straight because I'd already been there and I wasn't going to do that again. But I'm here describing myself because I want you to understand that it can happen to any of us. And if these kinds of situations sound familiar to you today, then what I'm going to tell you to do, pump your brakes. Take a pause. Start having a conversation with somebody who's outside the situation, who could probably help you think a little clearer. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying be careful who you talk to. I mean, I think counselors are great because, I advocate that in specific. But short of going to a counselor today, right now, it's in talking to someone who has got a little more life's experience, someone who's objective. I don't mean somebody who's dramatic, because I'm not trying to have you go from one dramatic person to another. But you might get a really interesting response from some people when you describe your crazy situation. And as you try to get your life back on track, one of the things that and I'm talking about the relationship crazy person obviously wants to do is if you have any sort of success or charisma or power in your life, other people want that. And the drama people want it too. They know that. They know your energy and your power, and they want it all for themselves. That's what makes you attractive. And they will tell you that they're the best person for you, to keep other people out of your life. And that other people out of your life thing, that means they're cutting you off from your social circle. Much like the friend that I was talking about earlier. She was being cut off from her social circle. And when the other tried to do an intervention on her, she was nowhere in the mindset that she was going to hear what they were saying. But they could all see that she was being used because they all saw how she was changing. Fortunately, my friends saw the same thing and pointed it out, and I was a bit more of a listener in that circumstance, and my life started to change. Soon as I got that person out, it started to change for the better. Because here's one thing that you will find. Individuals who are crazy makers, who are drama kings and queens, users, they will find the next person to use. You can't change them. Only they can change them. And whatever stuff that's going to happen to them, the further away you are, the better. And it may be one of those things. You may get a phone call that they're in jail and they need you to bail them out, or they're stuck on the side of the highway somewhere, or they're in some real social pickle and they're trying to find a way out. It's not your job to rescue them. It is not your job to fix their situation. It is your job to look at where you are, to manage your life, and be involved with somebody who cares about you. We all have lessons to learn, and you may be helping them learn their lesson and learning it at their expense, not yours. So think about that. I'm John Johnson, And this is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I want to thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.